I wouldn't normally recommend doing live changes of lenses with the camera on while you're doing an HDMI feed. Hi everybody. You might have seen this video up here. One ring to rule them all. No, sorry, wrong movie, wrong link. One mount to rule them all. This is finally the sort of part one follow-up to that original video. And that video was the idea that the Z mount on the Nikon cameras is the most adaptable lens mount known to man because it is the largest and it is the shallowest. And what did it mean? And one of the things that I suggested back then was that you could mount on a Nikon camera a Sony lens. That's what you could do. So we are shooting on the A7R III and the Nikon Z7. The Z7 is a 45 odd megapixels and the A7R III is 42 megapixels. What we're going to do with this little adapter here, made by TechArt, is we are going to mount live between these three cameras. We're going to mount the Sony. So I've got two lenses today that we're going to put on both cameras. And that is the Sony 35mm 2.8 and the Sony 55mm 1.8. And the closest lenses I have to those for my Z is the 35mm 1.8 Z and the 50mm 1.8 Z. This is a live feed from the Z7 with its 35mm 1.8. Let's jump to the Sony. Now, I think part of why we're seeing a different frame there is because the Sony doesn't show all of the viewfinder in its view. It doesn't show all of the frame in its viewfinder. But these cameras are at exactly the same height and the same distance from the subject. There is the Z7 with, I mean, it's interesting, its 35mm 1.8 is quite different to the Sony's 35mm 2.8. Obviously that aperture has something to do with it. But we are the same distance from the subject, we're at the same height. All right, so here's the adapter. We're going to take it out of its box. There it is. So that is the TechArt E mount to Z mount. As you can see, it's small, it's shiny, it looks cool. We are now going to unmount. So you have the native lenses now on each camera. Let's go back to the Sony and we are going to live unmount this. Let's see what happens. Let's see if we break the camera. Okay, off we go. And here it goes. It's coming off. And that's all you get. Let's cut to camera one. Now we're going to mount. We're going to mount this on here. We've got to get our white dot and our white dot aligned. We can see these white dots. And click. Okay, that is now Z mount ready. We can see all the pins, all the different requirements. We're going to put the Sony lens on the Nikon body. Here we go. And we are matching the white dots here. What we can see here now is this is the Sony 35mm on the Nikon Z7. The final part of this is I am going to take stills with all three combinations. So that is the Z lens on the Z camera, the Sony lens on the Z camera, and then the Sony lens on the Sony camera. And we can just have a look. I'm not trying to prove which one's sharper or any of that sort of stuff, because we've got lenses from different vintages and designs and so on. But really I'm just trying to show what's possible. All right, so we're going to take a still. Here we go. and we're going to have the settings the same. So this is 1/25 at 2.8. There it is. We've taken the still, and that is the review of that still. Seeing as we're here, we may as well do, let's say, an f5.6 as well, and we will drop that shutter down appropriately to something like 1/5 of a second. No, we'll go to 1/2 of a second. Okay, so we've done that. Now we will take this lens off and we will stick it back on the Sony. It's actually quite difficult to remove the lens. You've got to use this little fragile looking lever here to pull that, and then you've got to hold on pretty tight, but it works. So we're going to now pop the Sony lens back on its body. Okay, great. Sony is still alive. And first we'll do the 1/25 at 2.8. Great. And now we're going to do the 5.6 at 1/2 a second. Sorry, at 0.25. These guys do it differently. That's an interesting difference between Nikon and Sony. Nikon do 1 2.5 of a second. Sony does decimals of a second. I think that, at least I think that's what we're saying. These will be pretty close anyway. Okay, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Everybody say cheese. Okay, so we've taken those two shots. Now we're going to be putting the 35 1.8S back on to the Z7. There it is, it's back on, it's alive. So we will shoot this at the 5.6, 2.8, sorry, 2.5. Off we go, lovely. And then we will try the 1/25 at 2.8 to match the Sony's. And here it goes. All right, so we're going to throw all of those images up on the screen.
Okay, I thought I'd walk us through the images that were captured, because all is not quite what I expected. So what we're starting with here is, this is the Sony A7R Mark III with the 35mm FE 2.8 at 2.8. So there it is, wide open, 2.8. And this is on the Sony. So if we go into 100%, we get a sense of what it's looking like. Focus is basically here. So that's looking pretty nice and pretty sharp. If we quickly jump over to the Z7 with the Sony. Now, when the lens doesn't have a full name, I know that this is the Sony lens. So there it is. That's it on the Z7. 35mm 2.8 at 100%. It's darker because the base ISO is 64 instead of 100, so we're kind of halving the amount of light almost. The lens looks very similar. We're not doing a full technical test here. Very similar, as we can see. So this is on the Z7, and then here it is, exactly the same thing on the Sony. Sharpness is similar. Not that I'm wanting to do a technical test, but here at 100%, it looks like a similar outcome. Again, this is brighter because it's at 100 ISO. We can see that here. So that's interesting point number one. So again, this is the Sony lens on the Sony body, and this is the Sony lens on the Nikon body. The first interesting thing that comes out of this, just zoom, I'm going to zoom out. So again, this is the Sony lens, and then here we have the Nikon 35mm. This is the Nikon 35mm. So just look up here, lens, Nikon, up there, 35mm. This is the Sony lens at 5.6 on the Nikon. This is the Nikon lens. Have a look how this changes here. So Sony lens, Nikon lens. Now, these are both the entire image. Why is the Sony lens cropped, essentially? This is the strangest thing. Now, is the image size changing? Is the camera cropping? No, we still have the same amount of pixels. So what is this telling us? I am going to have to do more research about this, but either Nikon's 35mm is wider than 35mm, or Sony's 35mm, which this is the Sony, is narrower. So again, Nikon wider, Sony narrower. Field of view, both 35mm. Here's the number, there it is, 35mm, 35mm. Now, apertures are the same. So we've got 5.6 on both cameras. If we look down here, and isn't it interesting, the colors are quite different between the two lenses. So settings are the same. We are on the same camera body here, but the colors are different. The Nikon is brighter. It's all very interesting to see how these lenses behave differently. And the last thing I want to look at here, so there you go, that's 100% on the Nikon, aperture 5.6, self-timer running as we can see. Hopefully there's no camera movement. And have a look at the difference between the two. Now, to my eyes, and I didn't take multiple images, and I'm not 100% sure on the focus, but I would say in this particular case, the Sony lens, and this, like I said, I'd like to do more robust testing and look at 5 images from each camera, but I would say the Sony lens is looking sharper. If we look in here, at this point, the signature, this is the Nikon lens, and this is the Sony lens. There's not much in it. I mean, is it because it's slightly zoomed in? Is it because there's slightly more contrast? But also, if we look over at these fine lines over here, look at these fine lines. Fine lines. And there's a difference. There could be some camera shake in there. So I would like to do some more testing. So this is the 35mm lens. Now, it is recognized by Nikon users that of the Z primes, the 35 is not as sharp as the 85 and the 50. Still not sure about the 20, like with the 50 being the craziest one.
Now we're going to do the 50 versus the 55mm. Now there is a 5mm difference in focal length. That is pretty minor. So what we have here is the Z50 1.8S, and we have the Sony FE 1.8 55. Let's take the 35s off. Here we go, that's that one off, and put the 50 on. There we go. Just a note to you guys that I wouldn't normally recommend doing live changes of lenses with the camera on while you're doing an HDMI feed. I'm doing that for us, so we can see it. Okay, here goes the Sony. Voila, okay. So let's get them both to the same settings. Got a beautiful shot there of the wall in focus, and then let's go to Cam 2, the Nikon, and it is, there you go, the same settings. So let's just have a look at the camera 3, and then camera 2. So their settings are the same, they've both got flat profiles and so on, but it's interesting how they present their images slightly differently. So both cameras are in their flat or neutral settings. Let's do the same thing. We're going to take the Sony lens on the Sony body and the Nikon lens on the Nikon body, and then we will put the Sony lens on the Nikon body with the adapter. Off we go. Let's start with Sony this time. So here it is wide open at 1.8. Boom. Hot. Now let's go to 5.6. Off we go, and actually that's too bright, so let's go to a third, a quarter. There's a quarter there, okay. Okay, Cam 2. Here it goes, beautiful. And then we will go to, there we go, all right. And shooting. 2-second time delay so we don't get any movement. Lovely. Okay, now we are going to detach the Sony and put it on the Nikon. Here we go. and off, and there it is, and down. Okay, here is the Sony. Okay, now we're going to stick this on here, white dot and white dot. On, click, okay, let's Z it up. Now it's feeling good, and done. Live on the Z7. There we have it. We have it focusing. We're getting our shot. It's a quarter of a second, and I'm going to go back to the 1.8 end of the spectrum. Let's push this Sony lens on the Nikon.
Okay, so what we have here is the Z7 with the Nikon Z 1.8 and the Z7 with the Sony 55 1.8. So that's why we can see a very slight difference in the size of the frame here. And what I see with the Nikon, and we're at 1.8, so we're wide open. And the reason I've done this one at 1.8 is because I can get both of these lenses to 1.8. I couldn't get the 35s because the Sony was a 2.8. In this particular case, I think the Nikon looks slightly sharper, but again, it's very slight, and I'd like to take a multiple of photographs to test that. Let's have a look over here at this grate. So this is the Nikon, that's resolving very nice. So in this case, I would say the Nikon is sharper, and this is at 1.8, keep in mind, than the Sony. And the Sony's slightly closer, so this should resolve better, but it's not. The 35, it felt like the Sony was sharper, and in the 50/55, it feels like the Nikon's sharper. This is not an exhaustive test. I don't want anyone to get too excited about this either way. When the virus is over, I'm going to get out there and shoot a lot more frames, and we'll have a much harder look at this. But I just think, really, my main point about all of this is that you can stick the Sony lenses on the Z camera and you are getting very comparable results. The other thing about going out into the field and shooting with the Sony lenses on the Z cameras is I just sort of want to see how they behave under non-studio conditions, but out there in the real world, and because it's a little bit harder, of course, in the real world for lenses to work and survive and so on. This is the full frame anyway, so there's the 50 and the 55. Interestingly, the color difference between these lenses is minor, whereas we saw quite a difference in the colors of those 35mm lenses. To do a comparison between the 55mm 1.8 Sony on the Z7 and on the A7R III, so here we're looking at it trying to ensure the exposure is similar on the Z7, and then this is the same lens on the Sony. So sorry, the cameras were in slightly different positions, of course, so the frame changes. So if we just look at the detail here of the signature, this is the Z7, and we're wide open, of course. So we're at 1.8. We can see they treat color a little. The wall is a bit of a different color. This is the Sony, again, the Nikon, and then if we look over here, keep an eye on this grate. This is the Sony, this is the Nikon. And I would say this lens performs very close to identically on the two bodies. We do have just a few more pixels on the Z7, and that might be an extremely small difference. It's 42 versus 45 megapixels. Otherwise, I would say it performs very, very similarly. So this bodes well for a Z mount user who wants to adapt Sony lenses. It does appear that you would get the same optical performance on your body as you would on your Sony body. Focus speed and all those sort of things, we've still got to test more of that sort of stuff, but optically, if you say a landscape photographer, still life photographer, it looks like it performs very, very well with this adapter.
Let's see how face detect works. All right, there we go. What we're going to do is we're going to move the Z camera over to video mode and see how it tracks my face in video mode. So we'll just quickly do that. Here we have the Sony lens in video mode. I'm in focus, I'm in focus, and I'm in focus. Okay, so as we can see, as a video lens, the autofocus, the face detect, etc. is working great with the Sony and the Nikon lenses on the Nikon. So let's pop the Sony lens back on the Sony body. Look, we know the face detect is going to work just fine on that, but let's have a look. Okay, just disconnect this. That was easy, getting better at that. Whack it back on camera 3. There we go. So we're going to go to match the video on both of these. We're both going to be 25 2.8. Boom. ISO 100, I just noticed they've got different ISOs, which is why the Sony is brighter. So I think what we've shown today is, and this is not an exhaustive test, this is just a bit of a follow-up. We are going to do more. That I'm not sure which camera to look at, so maybe I should look between the middle of the two. They're about 15 centimeters apart, so I'm going to be agnostic and look between the middle. That's going to be confusing as Mark changes between them. And no, I'm deliberately going to look between the two. So then you can just flip between them to show the different shots. What this has shown us is that the Sony lenses are playing nicely on the Nikon body. What I'd like to do in the future, I was originally wanting to get out in the field and just sort of test them in harder situations. That's a little bit more difficult at the moment, so I'm going to hold off for that for a while. But this shows us how the adapter works, the fact that it does work, the fact that we do get functionality, and so on. As always, thank you so much for being here today. It is so good to see you. And if this is your first time here, it has been so good to see you. And if you'd like to see me again, I'd like to see you again as well. I mean, that would be amazing. So please subscribe, please share, makes us all smarter. I'd like some help on that front. Please like, helps get the word out there. And if you'd like to see over 150 videos right now, just click on the Matto and Photography just down the bottom here and you can watch them. All right, see ya.